It is now 10 o'clock in Amsterdam, where I'm broadcasting from, and it is time to get started. So I hope you all have your coffee or tea ready. You lean back in your chair, plugged in your headset, and that I have your attention. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to each and every one of you for joining me in today's webinar called Spotlight on ITOM. It is great to see so many attendees being able to join here today from several different time zones, and I'm very sure that we will have a lot of fun and a learning experience together. So I hope that my voice is crisp and clear and that there is no interferences with the connection, because now it is time to indeed start the webinar called Spotlight on ITOM. So I will today be your host for roughly 60 minutes, and my name is Alexander. So I thought it would make sense if I started off this webinar by briefly introducing myself. So, who am I? Well, my name is Alexander Ljungström. That is a very weird Swedish last name, so don't try to pronounce that. And I will not only be your host here today, but I will also take you through a journey of ITOM. And I want to start off by telling you a little bit about myself here. First of all, I really love automation. And when I say that I love automation, I don't mean that I kind of like it, I fancy doing it, I don't mind it. I burn for automation. That is my life. And that has also led me to exposure in great and interesting IT projects all over the world. So I've been working with IT in over 12 countries as of this moment, all related within automation. And this has led me to form a very deep interest in how humans interact with IT and technology. Because we humans, we can talk different languages and have different cultures and different habits, but the IT and technology often looks the same everywhere around the world. And that for me is something really cool. So how this is related to today's webinar is that I'm a previous business owner. I am very much interested in the business perspective of things, but I am also a very technical person. I created my first CMDB when I was in high school, and that was quite a while ago now. But ever since then, I am completely hooked on everything around ITOM, ITSM, and you name it. So I'm currently working as a ServiceNow consultant within Symphony. So before we start the actual presentation, I wanted to take you through a little bit what Symphony is. So Symphony is a ServiceNow partner, actually a preferred solutions partner to ServiceNow. And we at Symphony, we don't just think it's fun to work with the platform. For us, the platform is an art form, and we try to reflect that wherever we go. So currently, Symphony operates in over 15 countries in different projects. We have in total 12 years in the market, and we can pat ourselves on the shoulder for having plus 400 implementations. So as you can see, we really dig ServiceNow. And Symphony doesn't only do ServiceNow solutions and consultancy, but we provide the entire life cycle around the ServiceNow ecosystem. So we also deliver stuff such as training and education. We also provide support and a lot of other things connected to the entire delivery around ServiceNow. So if you haven't checked us out yet, I would strongly recommend to look up Symphony. But today, we're here for other purposes. We're going to indeed talk about ITOM, or IT Operations Management, as is also known as. So I want to take you through the agenda here a little bit and what we're going to go through here today. So I will start off by having a technical overview about ITOM and what it is. I will briefly explain the product and the technology powering it behind, but only scratching the surface. So it is good if you've already read a little bit about ITOM, but if you haven't, this will be a great opportunity to get an introduction to that. I will, of course, also go through how to get started with ITOM, because to be honest, ITOM, it is a big beast to tackle. It is many areas where you kind of can enter into it, and it is a very big, let's say, pillar of the ServiceNow platform, which requires a lot of extra attention and effort. So knowing how to get started, that is something important. We will also be learning a little bit more about setting the scope. Setting the scope is always very important in an ITOM-related project to know what you want to include. And that will lead us to go through the milestones in an ITOM project, both major and more minor ones, and we will also then be able to see the immediate quick wins, so to speak. And a topic which is always reoccurring and of course related is the licensing and also costs related to the ITOM project, which might not necessarily be straight to licensing or implementation, but so-called hidden costs. Basically, costs that people don't always account for in the beginning of the ITOM project. So once I've taken you through that, I'm going to summarize the most important key points which I want you to bring with you from today's session, and that will be followed by a question and answer session. Some of you guys have already been eager to ask questions and have pre-submitted it, so I will start off by answering them. However, if there is some time left, I will try to answer them in the end here. So what will you learn today? Well, my intention is not only for you here to listen and it's going in through one ear and out the next one. I actually want you to pick up something here today. So indeed, we had the previously mentioned technical recap where we will scratch the surface about ITOM and see what it is. You will learn to have a structured approach of thinking about ITOM. And having this structured approach, that is really beneficial for a lot of phases in an ITOM project. Also knowing how to set realistic expectations on the product and the way it can develop your organization is very important, and also the milestones related to it. You do this, of course, by asking the right type of questions, digging for the right information, and doing the appropriate amount of data mining. Especially talking to the right people, because there are many people and different roles often connected to an ITOM project, and together you can, of course, work better to set the scope. Basically, what will this ITOM project include that you have been thinking about? And all of this is related to raising the general awareness about ITOM, both in yourself, but it could also be in the organization as a whole, or in your colleagues, or in your friends at work, etc. Basically getting the conversation started about ITOM. And then last but not least, we have the risks and specific insights, which is related. So there is always risks attached to a project, and if you don't have much experience within ITOM, it is good to be aware of, let's say, classic pitfalls or ways to look after. So all of this will be related for all of you to be able to form a better business case, basically. There are a few things which is good to know before we get started. I will not have a specific slide dedicated to the risks in each chapter. Instead, I think it is wiser to let you guys know when there is a particular risk worth mentioning. So whenever you see this box, that is basically a common risk factor, which is worth pushing some extra attention on. And whenever you see this box, that is extra information, which I do encourage you to research separately outside of this webinar. But when you do see this box, it is because I can't deep dive into the particular topic itself, but it is very much interested and related to the webinar. So I do indeed encourage you to keep on researching after it. And last but not least, feel free to ask questions during the session. If I am not able to answer them in the end here, I will hopefully make the time and reach out to you individually, as I do have your attendee information. So I'm always happy to bounce ideas and talk about ITOM separately. So feel free to use the chat for questions. All right. So let's see. Let's start with the technicals about ITOM. And before I get started, I would like to tell a personal anecdote how I got in touch with ITOM and how it relates to what I'm doing today. So quite a few years ago, I was working at this IT help desk up in the north of Sweden. In very cold mornings, I went to the office, sat down at my computer, and I was doing kind of regular operations management. That is, I was putting up users in the Active Directory, I was setting password, I was provisioning software, there were Citrix servers, and this was user support, and so forth. The typical kind of help desk ways of working. And as my skills there grew, my interest in automation also caught on. So what I did was that I started automating a few of the manual processes which we had that were related to creating users in the Active Directory. So what I did is that I created PowerShell scripts that instead of doing all of these manual steps, you would just enter it into a script and all the user information would be created, for instance, in Active Directory and in the Exchange and other environments. And this was all good. It was appreciated by my colleagues, of course, and it saved us a lot of time, but it wasn't perfect, I thought. Because to be honest, it still required kind of human interaction. It required a service desk agent to actually remotely log into the server, open up some old-fashioned PowerShell prompt, and then start inputting data in the terminal. So it was still kind of old-fashioned way of working. And that, what I did then, is now referred to as IT operations management. Basically, working with the tools around IT. So if we then have a look here at the ITOM definition then, what are we talking about? Well, it doesn't only need to be my example of using scripts, but it could also be a lot of other ones. So first of all, IT, we do deliver services on behalf of a business. It could be for the HR department, it could be for salary, it could be a lot of different cases where the IT department is basically requested to deliver some sort of service. And they of course do this via tools and processes which aid them and help them in the daily work. And this makes sense. We use switches, we have servers, we have applications, and there are many ways that the IT department work to support the rest of the business and the users. And all of this, that is known as ITOM, or IT operations management. Basically, how these two parts work together. So a few real-life scenarios then. Something which would very much be considered an area within ITOM is, for instance, a CMDB, configuration management database. You would have your computers there, you would have your printers and different types of CIs and so forth. A reference for your employees and for your help desk personnel and management, etc., to use for instance, to create reporting and to provide daily support. Which indeed brings us to the next topic. Something big within ITOM have historically always been end user support, as I mentioned previously, what I was doing many years ago, and this is something which continues today. We use a bunch of different ITIL processes and help desk tools and different ways of working to ensure that our end users are happy. They like what we provide to them. And all of this is often built upon applications and infrastructure. In the very bottom of it, you do have a bunch of servers and you have virtual environments, and it is a lot going on these days, basically. And how we interact with this and the methods we are using to work around all this, that is very much something which would fall under the umbrella of ITOM. So a few other examples could, for instance, be infrastructure config, Active Directory, classic one. We have software distribution. You might push out software to clients, automatically installed according to group policies and so forth. We have rapidly changing virtual environments, Citrix farms, VMware clusters, you name it. It's a lot going on in the virtual sphere today. Event management, seeing what's going on in the infrastructure, feeding it with data and alerts. Of course, tying that to monitoring, seeing what's going on and when something is happening, and being able to do a proper root cause analysis. All of those are good examples of ITOM in real life. So how we have worked with this so far is what I like to refer to as legacy tools. And these legacy tools, they don't really fit in as good anymore. Because honestly, information technology, it looks very different today. If we just compare 5 years ago, I'm standing here right now talking to all of you guys, and my computer, I'm not even using an Active Directory to log into it. Everything is on the cloud. It's Microsoft Azure, it can be Amazon, and so forth. And all of this has happened rapidly fast. So indeed, cloud solutions is not the only thing, but also mobility. We all expect to be able to use devices such as iPads and iPhones to access our company data, and we also then work with much bigger data sets. We capture way more than we did just a few years ago. But having all of this informational requirements, we kind of lack service visibility. We don't necessarily know exactly how a service looks. And what I mean with a service, it could be a system, let's say a web shop, or it could really be an HR system or salary system, etc. And to know how this actually looks, not only that we have a bunch of servers and somewhere it is running a system, but know exactly which servers and which parameters are related to it and how it interacts in the infrastructure as a whole, that is not that easy in legacy tools. So this often creates outages. That is an unreliable service availability. So you often see websites go down, servers go down, there is downtime, it's frustrated users and line managers calling the help desk. You can go on and on for how much frustration basically this unreliable service availability causes in an organization. And it actually creates kind of a fear of moving too fast, because if you don't have a stable environment, you don't want to push out new things too fast there basically, which makes sense. So people kind of hold back and they don't want to go too eager into projects and it's slow transitions, but it doesn't need to be this way. However, basically the legacy systems are making it increasingly difficult to meet today's and tomorrow's business demands. And that is very true. All in all, I would say that they are often difficult to use. The user interface might not be optimal. There might be several extra, let's say, login credentials, and people are not using single sign-on, etc. It is many ways of improving that. It is hard to manage, not only for the users, but also often for, let's say, the help desk personnel. Slow loading systems, and it is not very user-friendly always, for instance. and it is often time consuming how we work with these tools. So let's say that you today want to know how a particular service works. Then the traditional approach would sit down a bunch of guys in a meeting room, you have maybe Microsoft Visio, and you start creating these maps of how everything are linked together and working with each other. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of manual efforts. And you do rely a lot on individuals and their particular knowledge rather than collectively available information, so to speak. But it doesn't need to be this way. And I think this is a very good slide for that. Life could be worse, Calvin. Yes, it's not that bad maybe, but life could be a lot better too. Because truth is, it is technology out there today, which really works better in all our favors, especially when how we work with general IT operations management. And that is where ServiceNow comes into the picture. So ServiceNow and ITOM, how are they playing together? In which ways? Well, first of all, ServiceNow consists of 4 kind of key points, which I consider is crucial for having a very, very strong ITOM influence in the IT world. And the first one of those 4 key points is an advanced level of automation. In ServiceNow, you can basically automate everything. And that is something which typically and historically seen hasn't always been possible. ServiceNow wants to create a service-aware CMDB. It's not only a matter of having a bunch of data, but you actually want to know how all of these CIs and configurements and servers are talking together. So not from an infrastructure perspective, but rather from a business service perspective. You want to be able to know what the CMDB really is about, and it should be a living source. It should be instantly reflected, and ServiceNow is really good at this. So by doing so, you get a very good insight, a complete insight, I would even want to call it, compared to other solutions historically seen. And by doing so, you get way better control over IT operations. Because IT operations, that is very, very crucial success factors in any business today. IT is so interconnected to all departments that if not operations are efficiently flowing and go smoothly, then that is an obstacle to tackle. So a few important points about ITOM, why it is so beneficial to use in ServiceNow. It helps you minimize the effort to maintain an accurate and living CMDB. It enables you to do efficient root cause analysis and decision making. So the decision making could here happen on several levels, not only in immediate actions when a problem occurs, but it could also be more strategic decision making, higher up the hierarchy by upper management or CTOs and so forth. You gain a total insight into the IT infrastructure and the different components that it consists of, and also their status and health respectively. Via ITOM in ServiceNow, you can indeed fully automate processing and provisioning. Provisioning could be provisioning software or servers in a virtual farm and so forth, and all of this can happen automatically via beautiful workflows. Something else which is very important in ServiceNow ITOM is that it's very easy to map business services and their dependencies. In ServiceNow, you know that, let's say, the e-commerce site, it depends on exactly these servers, these configurations, and these type of settings to function. And via ServiceNow, you would be able to pinpoint what happens. Let's say if we do an upgrade on this server, how will that affect a particular SAP module, and how will that affect the general sales? So you would be able to capture KPIs or key performance indicators way more detailed via using ServiceNow and ITOM. You have event management to leverage that, which basically means that ServiceNow Event Management acts as an aggregator or kind of the spider in the web, and it hooks into multiple sources, different data feeds to capture these events. And by doing so, you are very easy able to pinpoint issues and the actual business impact it has immediately. And this is with real-time updating maps. Of course, it is all happening in one platform. These are not separate tools, but you can all access them from within the same platform. Some of you might recognize this picture. It is the entire enterprise service model which ServiceNow offers. And as for today, we are indeed focusing on the operations management part. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what it consists of exactly here. And I will just go through this quickly. So discovery, that is a repeatable and reliable way to identify the components of enterprise IT and making it possible to, let's say, capture an accurate and up-to-date map of the relationships between them. You can discover infrastructure very quickly. You can enhance service processes. It contributes to faster problem resolution and integrating mapping of, let's say, hardware and software and applications and so forth. So discovery is a really neat tool. Then we have the service discovery and mapping part. So service mapping is really about kind of proactively trying to identify service issues, and you want to be able to pinpoint disruption and also automate rollbacks or remediations, as it's also called. So if it is determined that a particular service degradation, let's say, is due to low memory on a server which has recently been downgraded, you can automatically create actions which would upgrade the server's memory again without any human interaction, for instance. And the service mapping, it maps business services and make the CMDB service aware, which we were previously talking about. It makes the CMDB kind of a living organism instead of just static data. We also have orchestration. This is where the automation comes in. With orchestration, you can automate many tasks, such as provisioning of servers. You can automate password resets, user administration, even to third-party tools or in your own internal applications. So let's say that spreadsheets and manual methods tend to go away once an organization starts with orchestration. It quickly becomes outdated. And the orchestration is often then integrated with, let's say, incident management and requests. So when a user do request something, let's say a new software for his or her laptops, it is also triggering an automatic action or workflow in the background which would install this software without anybody interacting or manually doing it, for instance. However, recently, orchestration has also started to stretch into the territories of, let's say, HR or salary and payroll, because you can apply a lot of the same principles in those areas as well. You also have configure automation. That is to automatically configure and deploy different type of machines, their images and provisioning. You can, for instance, clone the previously mentioned service maps, which I was talking about from service mapping, and easily spin up new infrastructure based on that, all from within the platform. And then you also have cloud management. Cloud solutions do become more and more popular these days. We don't only have the private clouds such as VMware or Hyper-V, etc., but we also have hybrid versions and public versions. Public version could be Amazon or Azure, and you also have this kind of smaller cloud solutions such as, let's say, Chef or Puppet and other types of tools. And last but not least, ITOM is about event management. And as previously mentioned, event management serves as an aggregator. It fetches events from your infrastructure, it displays them, do it user-friendly, and it can reach everywhere it can really integrate with your current monitoring solutions. It can really optimize the ways you are working with alarms and events. It is worth mentioning that ServiceNow by itself doesn't have monitoring capabilities, but it's indeed relying on external tools to do so. So, let's have a look here. How is it different with IT operations in ServiceNow? It uses the intelligent discovery to identify and map IT components. It uses the orchestration to automate actions and processes. It maps business services to different types of infrastructure, could be servers, applications, switches, etc., fully automatically via service mapping. It integrates event management from different monitoring tools to create service awareness and real-time updating dashboards and a CMDB. It tends to remove manual processes such as Excel sheets and MS Access database or other types of manual intervention, and it can also make use of latest cloud technologies, as previously mentioned, Azure, Amazon, etc. And it is providing one platform for all user levels, everything from the highest director in the company down to service desk agents and end users. And it tries to combine this with ITSM and the rest of the platform, basically. So I think it's good if people research the technical capabilities and tools behind ITOM in general, because it is not always that easy to grasp it. Because what we often see is that there are happy users of ServiceNow. They have kind of started working with the platform. You've had your go live, it's been implemented. There is some competence there. All tools are being thrown out, and ServiceNow is awesome, basically. And once people have been working with this for a little while, you notice that people start thinking about ITOM a little bit more, especially management or operations personnel or project teams, for instance, because you hear about ITOM everywhere these days. It is in knowledge conferences, you see it in LinkedIn, it's in different news feeds. ITOM is buzzing, basically. But it doesn't always make sense. There is so much information about ITOM. There are so many entry points and different data to include and websites to read, so it often feels kind of overwhelming. And as a result, there is a certain degree of uncertainty in how to get started. The idea itself about ITOM, it rarely leaves the whiteboard and the meetings room. And in cases like this, that is when a business case and a solid analysis can be needed, which will lead us excellently into the next part of how to get started. So indeed, the ITOM roadmap is not always immediately clear, and finding, let's say, examples of other organizations' ITOM journey might be tricky. But truth is, the core concept of ITOM is not that hard, really. It is a matter of having really a structured approach of attacking the ITOM concept, because ITOM is big, don't get me wrong. It is a lot of data to read and to form an understanding about. But it is entirely feasible and possible to break this down into smaller chunks and, let's say, address them one by one. So in order to do so, we need to raise the ITOM awareness. And this typically happens via asking three questions. That is reoccurring all the time. Or let's say 3 points. And the first one of those points are indeed asking the right questions. And the right questions I will tell you a little bit more about in just a little while here. And once you're able to ask the right questions, we can connect the right people to it, include the appropriate stakeholders, and form the right understanding about what ITOM really is. So the first question then to ask, speaking about asking the right questions, That is, where are we today? So when we ask that question, I think it's very important, to identify the needs that the organization have. And that often could be things such as, where do we struggle? And what I mean with where do we struggle could be, let's say, poor time to resolution. We are using a bunch of outdated legacy tools, which is not user-friendly. They don't connect to all of our systems. It requires a lot of workarounds and so forth. And we have a problem with unreliable service availability. Servers go down, systems are unreachable, people are frustrated. You know the deal. And the other question could be, what keeps repeating here? So we have things such as user frustration. If a service go down, they can't find the cause of the outage, let's say, or the personnel working with this, they can't tell which systems that are connected to each service. And there are a lot of manual processes which are error prone and extremely inefficient. So it takes a long time to resolve incidents and deliver services in general. And there could also be a lot of dependency on Excel sheets or slips here and there. And last but not least, shadow IT. So shadow IT is basically people who are so frustrated with the tools they use every day that they find their own solutions. And these solutions are not captured by the IT department. So these people, they're not following the processes. And who can blame them? If the systems are not there to work, what should they do, you know? So if we then look at analyzing the current tools and processes in relation to ITOM, it is important to see which tools are in place today and what value do they offer. Because as previously mentioned, the odds are 100% that each and every one of you indeed are using ITOM to one extent or another today. And knowing which ones and what actual value do they offer to the organization, that's very important. It is also important to analyze how users in the entire chain work with the tools. So that would be everything from end users to personnel and how they are interacting. Where do they log on? What type of actions do they invoke in the systems and so forth? And where can we find bottlenecks here? And how does these processes relate to ITOM and how do they look like? So there are many ways of working with the tools already, but are they always the most efficient, or do they cause pain points basically? And it is also important to see which roles and responsibilities and key persons is connected to the general IT operations management. Not having appropriate, let's say, understanding of the roles and responsibilities that often create quick fixes and fire extinguishing rather than having a clear set of routines where everyone just knows what to do and when. The next question would be to ask, where do we want to go with ITOM? And in order to do so, it requires a genuine understanding of what ITOM is, both from a technical perspective, but also from many points. So forming this understanding could be stuff such as asking what is possible within ITOM. If we have an idea, does it fall under ITOM or is it another area? And is that idea realistic? Can it be done? And if so, how can it be done? And what are the dependencies of it? And it could also be good to analyze the immediate effects, what ITOM would bring basically. So the immediate effects could be that you instantly throw out some process where users call into the help desk to reset their password, but instead they use a self-service portal to reset their password, for instance. You have a lot of immediate effects which comes more or less instantly from starting the journey of ITOM. And can we connect ITOM? Because truth is, ITOM, that is so much related to ITSM or IT service management. ITOM work better if you have incident management in place and you have request management and you can tie let's say, alarms to different changes, and you can kind of connect all of these dots and pieces of the puzzle of ITOM into your ITSM practices. So I would recommend all of you here to read a little bit about how ITOM interacts with ITSM and why they are such good pals, basically. And once you've asked yourself all of these 4 questions and started analyzing this, that would be able to put you on what is called as the Service Operations Maturity Model. And this is a very good model to use in order to go from a static or reactive state to service awareness, as previously mentioned. And this maturity model, I would say, is key to have a genuine and truthful understanding of it, where we stand today, what we have, and how to see in which way the organization wants to move forward. That is instantly a first quick win, and that could be a milestone in itself, because through understanding we can dive into starting implementing and actually leveraging ITOM. So most of the users today, or most of the customers we see, they are somewhere in phase 1 with bits and pieces of phase 2 and 3. So they might have some discovery tool in place. They've already realized the benefits with working with a single CMDB. They might have certain amount of automation tied to it. And then every now and then we see them have some monitoring system and alarm solution and so forth. But really connecting everything of this together, well, that's a long-term journey that you want to invoke on with a long-term strategy as well. And using this service operation maturity model and always referencing it, it can be really helpful there. Especially helpful for setting the scope. So setting the scope for an ITOM project, that is a very, very crucial part, because as I mentioned, ITOM is very big, and setting the scope, that is something which often organizations and users struggle a little bit with. So I want to take you through a little bit easier how to determine this scope, because it is not always that simple. The first thing for determining the scope would be looking at the existing needs or requirements. As previously I was mentioning, you go to yourself an organization and look at where do we struggle extra much today, basically. Where do the organization have to improve? Where do we face our challenges? And the other good point to raise here for determining the scope is knowledge. Knowledge about ITOM as a technology, knowledge about where you want to put your immediate priorities, and also where you could get the instant business value, and also stuff such as ROI or return on investment. And last but not least, it is very important to do a pre-study and assessment. And this is typically a part where companies such as Symphony, we help our customers with having workshops, we help them assess their current structure and ways of working. We're basically in through the entire journey. So doing so is very important to successfully being able to set a realistic and achievable scope, let's say. So what to include in this scope then? Well, here are some examples which I think are good. It is important to decide upon which products from the ITOM suite to include. That makes sense. If you don't have a CMDB yet set up, it might be hard, let's say, to instantly get a monitoring solution which interacts with the CMDB if you don't even have the CIs populated. So sitting down and thinking about which products to include from the ITOM suite, that's indeed very important. Also deciding upon which has the highest priority of them, where do we see it helping us immediately, and that can be very useful. Also decide upon if process support is required, and with process support, that is basically how people are working today versus how they would work in the future, in the aftercare of the ITOM implementation. Do they need to change their ways of working? Will anything be different? Is there any education which needs to be put in, for instance, and so forth? But to really determine the scope, it can be very useful to do a proof of value. So being able to show not only in theory and sitting down on paper that this would help us, but instantly doing a small test and seeing the results, that is often very useful, at least in my opinion. And it's very important to not aim for a big bang, because ITOM is indeed a long journey, and you don't release everything and go from static to service aware in one night. That is indeed something which happens gradually. So a very big risk is having a too ambitious scope. I mean, don't get me wrong, ITOM is really great, and it has so much juicy bits which can get you triggered and hungry on further innovation, let's say. But initially, I think the maturity and capacity of your organization, where do you stand in this maturity model, and what capacities do you have to start working with ITOM in ServiceNow? That relates very much to the scope, and having this too ambitious, that is indeed a risk. So rather play it down a little bit and start slowly than having a too big scope which always remains unsuccessful. So indeed, our dear friend Calvin here has an excellent solution. We'll just make one big pancake and cut it in half. No, don't do that. Shame on you if you do. Some common milestones in an ITOM project. I want to let you know a little bit more about the different types of milestones we typically see, the immediate, let's say, quick wins, but also in a longer term. So milestones, I think it makes sense to always divide them up into two parts. On the left part here in this PowerPoint, you see the organizational one, and on the right side, you have the technical one. And these two are very important to keep separated, and I will tell you a little bit more about it in just a while here. So if we start with the milestones from an organizational point of view, then that could, we tend to see that is often a bit more abstract. It could, for instance, include resolving certain pain points which are in relation to the previous needs of the organization, and it tends to focus on rather the big picture of the organization as such, rather than individual, let's say, technical accomplishments. And this is often measured by different CXOs, and with CXO I mean CEO, CTO, CIOs, etc., etc. So this is typically more interesting for the long-term strategy and alignment of the organization and what it will get out of ITOM. Which indeed brings me to the strategic alignment. And indeed, this is a long-going process. Building maturity as an organization within ITOM, that often takes longer time than implementing the actual technique behind it. So be aware of that. It might be wise to have a separate roadmap for the organization. On the technical side, however, that is always related to the technical implementation itself. And you tend to reach the milestones faster here, or the quick wins. And that is often the first thing that employees and end users tend to take notice of. So in an ITOM project, the technical major milestones, that will always be accomplished via having good communication and clear agendas, letting the users know everything from ways of working changing to the new systems which will be implemented, and also have clear agendas. It should be easily measurable and precise timelines if you talk about the technical parts here. It shouldn't be too abstract, basically. However, because the technique behind ITOM, although it can be summarized in today's webinar in 5 minutes, it is massive and it is hard to keep track of. So it can indeed be wise to consult expert help here. in order to determine the technical milestones and what is realistic or not. But if we look more closely then regarding a few of these different milestones, on the organizational ones, we could have points such as outages reduced. They want to improve quality of service, improve service delivery and speed, increase visibility. You might want to be able to restore services faster and improve resolution time, for instance. You might want to reduce the number of tools that the organization is using or consolidate them more into using one platform, such as ServiceNow. And you want to gain better control and ensure compliance, for instance. So these are typical common measurement points for the organization on the more abstract layer of things. On the technical side, on the other hand, that is also known as, let's say, the immediate quick wins. And that could be something such as all the users are migrated to self-help for a password reset. It could be 100% of the IP addresses in a specific subnet or data center should have been discovered. You want to be able to map the first critical business service, integrate the event management and tools, automate a certain process in the graphical workflow editor by orchestration, include approvals, email notifications, etc. 100% of the users migrated from a certain system to now go into a ServiceNow module or application instead. All of the data carried over from a legacy application or database into ServiceNow. Being able to, let's say, provision software installations via request automatically, and so forth. But being able indeed to set those technical milestones that do requires knowing the technology behind ITOM, and not being able to properly, let's say, invest time in researching that typically causes people to set also unrealistic technical milestones. And that is something which you want to avoid. Then, of course, a recurring theme is the costs and licensing, because indeed costs are always relevant, and this is something which I often get the question after holding a presentation with a bunch of customers, and we talk about how great your technology is, and then someone in the meeting room says, but hey Alex, what will this cost us? Well, it's a very relevant question. So you should know that ITOM in itself, it requires the core setup of ServiceNow. So you cannot have ITOM without having the core setup of the ServiceNow platform, such as the incident management modules, change management, etc. It is very recommended to have this operational and to be using ServiceNow already. Otherwise, the previously mentioned scope might not only be big in the sense that we want to implement ITOM, but we also want to implement ServiceNow as a whole. Although possible, it's still very much worth mentioning, I think. The payment model then for ITOM, the licensing is kind of hard and a challenging topic to tackle, but typically it is seen as you pay per node per month, and a node is a physical or virtual server basically. As of the current moment when we're broadcasting this webinar, I think the per node per month for, let's say, orchestration, if you want to automate stuff, is somewhere around $6. But if you want to include everything, discovery, service mapping, and orchestration, let's say, then you would pay around $18, I believe, per node per month. And the minimum amount of nodes to buy is 250 of them. But as I mentioned earlier, licensing is typically quite a tough topic to tackle. And it is something which is subject to change, because depending on how many nodes and how you tend to use the product and other factors, the price might also be impacted positively, that is. So for the latest information about the specific licensing costs, I always encourage you to either talk to ServiceNow or partners such as Symphony for the latest and most relevant information, which would be specifically pinpointed to your implementation. So there are a few cost challenges which is kind of hidden, and this is a typically reoccurring point. Why do enterprises sometimes struggle to implement and then get the full value from ITOM? Well, enterprises often don't look at the prerequisites, and there are 3 buckets of prerequisites, I would say, for a good ITOM implementation. These are those 3. It is business, IT management, and technical dependency. All these could cause problems. On the technical dependencies, or let's say on technical problems, dependencies on other tools is a biggie. Organizations tend to discover what they lack late in the implementation. Then the team struggles with whether to go back or ask for more time and so forth. And those are both bad things to tell to your management. So from a technical point of view, let's say if you're implementing event management, it requires you to have other tools in place. So discovering this in a late stage, that can often add to the final bill of the project. For the IT management, the challenge is often their focus, I would say. Managers at various levels in the organization are typically empowered to indeed make purchasing decisions or recommendations, but is often on a solution-by-solution basis. So in some cases, I think that this can lead down to a narrow focus on point solutions, sort of kind of idle style IT operations management down there somewhere in the weeds where it's very hard to see the big business value picture, and the IT management sometimes tend to miss this, unfortunately. And last but not least, we have the business. So third are the business hurdles, and that is, the difficulty is that the business mind people in an organization, they often don't understand their IT dependencies well enough to have a meaningful discussion about ITOM-related business metrics. So it can be hard for an organization to measure the exact return on investment the ITOM project actually has. So I think these 3 points are a very large contributing factor to hidden costs, so to speak. So indeed, keeping track of the prerequisites is very important. And it's also a risk of not doing so. So connecting the right people is crucial, and having them on board at an early stage even more important. It is now time for a short summary and wrap-up. We're starting to run out of time here, only a few more minutes. So I'm going to start off instantly with what we discuss about the technique. ITOM means IT Operations Management. All companies are using it already to some extent. And as we determined, the traditional tools are not fit for fight anymore there. So ServiceNow really brings in a fresh take on that particular topic. And they do so via leveraging the technologies known as discovery, service mapping, orchestration, cloud management, and event management. So the technical abilities ITOM in ServiceNow brings are many. And to make sure to research and understand this is very crucial from a technical point of view. If we go ahead and have a look at the scope should take the maturity model into consideration, as I told you earlier, this from static to service aware and where you are as an organization. The scope may include one or several parts of the ITOM suite. It also requires you to set realistic expectations on the product and roadmap in itself. And remember, the scope should not be too big. Don't make one big pancake like our dear friend Calvin did. And this indeed might sometimes require expert help in order to fully get it right and do it right from the beginning. Regarding the milestones and costs then, milestones, as we concluded, can be divided up into 2 camps basically. The organizational milestones, which is a bit more abstract and higher level, and then the immediate quick wins or technical milestones. So indeed, the quick wins are often on the technical side. And in order to properly determine them, it do requires kind of a little bit more deep understanding of the capabilities behind ITOM. Costs are both license-related, payable plugins such as discovery or service mapping, and also platform-related to setting up the core or the core base which is required to leverage ITOM. And not having the previously 3 mentioned prerequisites in place, that might turn expensive. So not having the IT management, the business and technical dependencies in place and track on, that is always a risk. And implementation costs always relates to the scope. So that is briefly what we've gone through here today. I'm now going to spend the last few minutes here just answering questions and answers here from our pre-submissions. The very first one I would like to answer, which I received, is what is Symphony's take on ITOM? I would say that one of the problems of getting, let's say, information discovered and put into the CMDB is that it's not correlated to a particular service. It's just a bunch of data. But by pulling service maps into the CMDB via ITOM, then we can inform enterprise users how, let's say, a stack of infrastructure relates to a particular business service, like the finance system or HR and CRM systems, etc. So for us, ITOM is more like the next logical step, because ITOM is closely tied to our ITSM business, where workloads tend to overlap. The other question I received was, what are some technical challenges during an implementation? This is more specific to the technicals, but on the top of my head, I would say don't discover too much. If you use discovery, don't try and discover the entire data center at once. Split it up into smaller chunks. And the other one is workflow designs. When you try to automate stuff, don't make them too massive. That's a no-go. And the very last question which I received was, what is a good example of expanding outside of IT with ITOM? And I think this is an interesting question. I did some thinking, and the best example I've seen was just recently, actually, where I saw how freezers and coolers for warehouses, those were using the ITOM concepts with monitoring and events to warn about when the temperatures of the freezers and coolers. But this was an entirely different business context. It wasn't related to the IT department per se, but it was very much using the ITOM concepts. So I would say that is a typical example of how you can leverage the ITOM technology outside of IT. And yeah, that was everything I had today. So let's make Calvin and Hobbes close today's session with Let's Go Exploring. I would like to thank you sincerely for listening to this webinar today. It's been great having you here on board. And unfortunately, we don't have time for any further questions. I've received one additional one, and I will make sure to reach out to the attendees individually to answer these questions. And for your information, this session has been recorded, so you will be able to find it again on our social media channels, such as YouTube. And on behalf of myself and Symphony, I would like to thank you sincerely yet again for your time here today. I hope to go and embark on this ITOM journey together with you. Thank you very much, everybody.